The modern productivity industry glorifies constant, unbroken physical and mental motion as the absolute ultimate marker of human superiority. This is a highly dangerous, mathematically fatal biological illusion, explicitly designed to mask profound neurological dysregulation. The exact clinical reality regarding extreme work addiction is actively suppressed by mainstream media to keep the masses running blindly without recovery. The critical window of opportunity to reverse this severe limbic hyperactivation is shrinking rapidly today. Anyone who ignores the next few minutes of this clinical breakdown will accumulate a permanent biological debt, guaranteeing irreversible structural damage to the central nervous system. Elite cognitive dominance requires absolute, unshakable physiological stillness and deep internal safety. The extreme modern drive actively destroys the exact biological hardware required to process complex variables and maintain endocrine stability. Highly compliant workers blindly worship the aesthetic of the daily grind, constantly moving from one meaningless task to another. Society falsely equates chronic biological panic with ironclad mental toughness and superior genetic adaptation. The human brain manages metabolic energy and volatile stress hormones with extreme, uncompromising precision. It absolutely requires deep parasympathetic recovery to halt internal cellular degradation and flush toxic byproducts. Forcing the physical body to operate in a permanent state of frantic motion violently overrides this essential evolutionary healing mechanism. The biological tax is immediate, silent, and thoroughly devastating to human longevity. The hidden biological reality is that extreme daily hustle is not genuine ambition or elite focus. It is a severe, clinically observable trauma response operating deep within the primitive centers of the brain. Forcing extreme output while the nervous system is chronically dysregulated destroys the baseline metabolic rate completely, ensuring early onset neurodegeneration. How the amygdala hijacks daily discipline. True biological discipline requires the profound neurological capacity to sit in absolute silence without generating internal chemical friction. When the central nervous system becomes chronically dysregulated through relentless overstimulation, this natural human baseline completely evaporates. The amygdala, the primitive fear and survival center of the human brain, violently hijacks the entire cognitive operating system. Under extreme chronic stress, the highly reactive amygdala begins to misinterpret physical stillness and silence as an immediate, lethal environmental threat. It floods the human bloodstream with massive, highly toxic volumes of adrenaline and cortisol, simply to manage the profound internal psychological panic. The exhausted individual is forcefully compelled to stay in constant, frantic motion just to burn off the corrosive stress hormones accumulating inside the skull. This is not elite productivity or superior willpower. It is a desperate, primitive biological escape mechanism. The conscious mind rapidly rationalizes this frantic behavior as extreme ambition, but the biological reality is a state of perpetual fight or flight. The autonomic nervous system remains permanently locked in sympathetic overdrive, constantly preparing the physical body for a violent physical attack that never actually arrives. The ambitious male literally loses the physiological capacity to rest. Sitting down to recover triggers severe chemical anxiety, forcing the physical body back into meaningless, repetitive labor just to momentarily soothe the panicked limbic system. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and restraint, is entirely bypassed and suppressed by this survival protocol. The entire biological organism is hijacked by clinical fear, operating purely on survival instincts rather than high-level strategic intelligence. The illusion of a relentless work ethic perfectly masks a terrified, hyperactive nervous system incapable of finding biological safety. The biological cost of running from trauma. Masking severe internal dysregulation with endless physical and mental labor guarantees catastrophic structural decay within the brain. Running constantly from internal biological panic consumes immense, fundamentally unsustainable amounts of metabolic energy. Mitochondria, the microscopic cellular power plants responsible for generating essential adenosine triphosphate, are pushed far beyond their natural evolutionary limits. The physical body rapidly burns through its finite ATP reserves, plunging the entire organism into a highly destructive and toxic catabolic state. To survive this self-induced metabolic crisis, the body actively cannibalizes its own healthy neural tissue for emergency fuel. Inflammation markers, specifically C-reactive proteins, skyrocket across the cerebral cortex, triggering widespread internal damage and cellular apoptosis. Toxic, unbroken flood of chronic cortisol violently attacks the hippocampus, the exact brain center directly responsible for memory consolidation and emotional regulation. The hippocampus literally shrinks under the crushing, relentless pressure of constant, fear-driven motion. The individual falsely believes an unbreakable, dominant mindset is being forged through endless hours of painful labor. Biologically, the exact opposite is occurring at a microscopic level. The delicate neural architecture is actively crumbling, losing density and synaptic connectivity with every passing hour of forced wakefulness. The invisible biological cost of running from internal trauma is rapid, irreversible cellular aging. Millions of driven individuals secretly suffer from massive internal neurotoxicity while projecting an image of total control. They completely lose the biological capacity to absorb new information or adapt to complex environments because their brain tissue is physically degrading. The ultimate price for utilizing work as an anxiety avoidance mechanism is a severe, measurable drop in baseline fluid intelligence. Why constant motion destroys the nervous system? Operating a human body without deep, restorative parasympathetic pauses systematically destroys the delicate neurochemical balance required for elite function. Dopamine is the vital molecule of natural motivation, unforced drive, and intense executive focus. Healthy, sustainable dopamine synthesis mathematically requires a foundation of profound physiological safety and absolute biological calm. Using endless corporate or physical tasks to cope with underlying clinical anxiety forces the autonomic nervous system into a highly unnatural, highly toxic state. The brain is constantly flooded with cheap, artificial dopamine spikes generated by checking off meaningless daily tasks simply to self-medicate the internal panic. Over time, the central nervous system detects this highly corrosive chemical flood and executes a severe biological defense protocol. It actively destroys its own dopamine receptors through a process called biological downregulation to shield the underlying neural tissue from overstimulation. A perpetually busy, highly disciplined worker literally loses the biological capacity to feel natural joy or authentic satisfaction. Severe, clinically induced limbic anhedonia, the total physiological inability to experience pleasure, becomes a permanent daily reality. The natural motivation centers of the brain physically shut down entirely to conserve finite metabolic energy for survival. Unforced human drive evaporates completely, leaving behind a cold, robotic shell entirely dependent on external stress and artificial deadlines just to initiate basic action. Without a massive surge of panic or artificial urgency, the physical body refuses to move. The nervous system is completely shattered by the toxic illusion of extreme productivity. The exact biological machinery required to sustain long-term high performance is permanently burned out by the relentless pursuit of constant motion. The hidden link between hustle and clinical panic. The extreme modern work ethic is mathematically and biologically indistinguishable from a severe clinical panic disorder. Chronic, unbroken hustle directly alters the fundamental immune behavior of the central nervous system, creating an environment of severe neurotoxicity. The microglia, which act as the essential immune cells of the human brain, begin to aggressively mutate under the constant, crushing pressure of sympathetic overdrive. Instead of quietly cleaning metabolic waste from delicate neural pathways, they become hyperactive, highly hostile immune agents operating entirely out of control. They start actively attacking and devouring perfectly healthy neurons, driving severe neuroinflammation deep into the prefrontal cortex. This essential cognitive command center is aggressively starved of glucose and oxygen as the panicked brain reroutes all available power to primitive survival mechanisms. Complex logical reasoning, impulse control, and long-term planning become a literal physical impossibility. The individual operates continuously through thick, suffocating brain fog, constantly dropping crucial variables and failing to process complex data efficiently. The biological system eventually hits an absolute mathematical breaking point, triggering severe panic attacks, chronic insomnia, and complete endocrine collapse. The adrenal glands fry entirely under the relentless daily demand for cortisol, leading directly to clinical adrenal fatigue. The human body becomes completely incapable of regulating its own energy states, fluctuating violently between extreme hyperarousal and total physical exhaustion. The globally praised hustle mentality is entirely a manifestation of a failing, heavily traumatized biological machine. The aesthetic of endless labor perfectly hides an internal biological environment that is actively collapsing under the weight of its own unmanaged fear. How to reset a traumatized autonomic system? Reclaiming absolute cognitive dominance requires completely and violently abandoning the toxic illusion that constant motion equals superior performance. The true global elite optimize their entire biological existence solely for maximum neural horsepower, absolutely refusing to trade their endocrine health for the aesthetic of exhaustion. The human brain mathematically demands deep, unshakable physiological calm to execute brilliant, flawless, high-level abstract thought. Returning to a natural, highly stable parasympathetic baseline is strictly mandatory immediately to halt the rapid, compounding cognitive decay. This targeted rest protocol instantly stops the violent neural inflammation and forcefully halts the highly destructive microglial attacks. The vagus nerve must be intentionally activated daily through profound, uncompromising stillness to break the toxic cycle of sympathetic fight or flight. The specific biological activation rapidly flushes toxic metabolic waste completely from the fragile neural pathways, restoring crystalline cognitive clarity. Elite executive function returns rapidly once the artificial exhaustion and chronic cellular starvation finally end. The prefrontal cortex physically expands back to its optimal, highly dominant biological size, reclaiming full control over the reactive amygdala. Highest global performers prioritize the intense protection of the central nervous system infinitely above meaningless physical labor. True modern power is strictly biological, deeply optimized, and never relies on frantic, fear-driven motion. This clinical breakdown firmly sets the required theoretical foundation for elite biological recovery and autonomic regulation. However, theoretical knowledge without exact, aggressive tactical execution guarantees absolute, mathematically certain failure. The exact step-by-step clinical protocols required to biologically rebuild the autonomic nervous system and regulate the hyperactive amygdala exist right now. The mainstream productivity industry actively tries to suppress the specific recovery data entirely to maintain a compliant, constantly working demographic. These essential clinical protocols are located directly in the description below this video right now. Go to the description immediately and access these elite optimization protocols today before the algorithm removes them. Applying these specific clinical resources guarantees the reclamation of lost cognitive dominance entirely and permanently. This eliminates adrenal fatigue fundamentally and completely bypasses the exhausted, highly distracted global competition. Subscribe to this channel immediately to join the absolute minority operating at peak biological performance. Stop trading human cognitive longevity for a severe trauma response masked as daily discipline. The critical window of opportunity to reverse this specific neural damage is closing extremely fast. Reclaim the shattered nervous system today before the biological damage becomes permanent and irreversible.